Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and tonight we are talking about our favorite alternate universe visions of Sam and Dean. The times when they're themselves, but they're not quite themselves, in canon and fanon. So before we start with that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes. I started watching Supernatural in season 3. I watched it through the end. I started writing fanfic in 2012, and in 2023, I started publishing romance under the name Ellis Colton.
And by the way, congratulations to Ellis Colton.
Thank you.
For The Malevolent Sea coming out. There she has the book, which we can kind of see, but it's ghostly. But that's okay because
it's all very ghostly.
Yeah. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa. This is Kitty. I've been a fan since the night the pilot aired. Kitty has only been a fan since 2020 because that's like when she was born.
Fair enough. And I'm Gail Z Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But all of my modern day worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I fell in love with the show halfway through season 11, binge watched 11 seasons in time for the start of season 12, fell down the rabbit hole and haven't seen the light of day since. Not that I've been looking for it very hard. So let's start with canons, the canon times when the boys weren't quite themselves and we're used to seeing them be FBI agents or, various types of fake law enforcement. But there are some other times we saw them get into it a little more than that. So Carole, lead us off with your favorite.
Oh gosh, certainly the FBI and the law enforcement things are the most prominent. I believe we've also seen them be newspaper reporters that are, questioning a case that's happened or a strange event that's happened. We've seen them be, now I'm really thinking. I know they're newspaper reporters. Melissa, what do you have while I'm thinking?
Well, I didn't do my homework right, so there's a surprise. My favorite AU was when they were the Rich Chesters, but it wasn't really Sam and Dean, so I don't know that counts. So,
that counts.
Otherwise, the yoga instructor when Sam was right.
How can we forget Sam as a yoga instructor?
And Dean in the hairnet because he was working in the kitchen. That was just hilarious.
Yeah, that's a good one. They've also been priests. That one where they showed,
too.
Huh? They showed up at the door, and I think at least one of them was wearing a priest shirt without the sleeves that goes under the vestments, which I don't think is supposed to be sexy, but kitchen rags on Jensen Ackles would be sexy. So, sleeveless clerical shirt. So yes, priests. And the yoga instructor. But Dean wasn't a yoga instructor in that one. Dean was.
No, he was working in the kitchen.
He was at work in the kitchen. And Sam was the yoga instructor, and that was lovely.
Mm-hmm.
I think the whole law enforcement thing is just so easy for them, because then they can kind of just fake way around in their various rock name
credentials,
fake names.
Dean was a high school gym teacher. And that particular episode launched a billion cosplays. If you ever go to Supernatural Con, you're guaranteed to see at least one fan dressed in that outfit.
And Sam as the janitor in the work hall.
And while the gym teacher outfit is funny, it's certainly not the best outfit Jensen's ever worn, but it was certainly memorable.
And didn't he fit into it years later or something? Didn't we see at some point there was like maybe a behind the scenes or something where they found it and he fit into it? Which is pretty amazing.
I got no comments on that. Nothing I can say.
Well, you know, in the French Mistake, we got to see them cycle through being a number of different personas. We got to see Jared being a spokesperson for pharmaceuticals. Um, oh, what else? We got to see because of course they're being put through their paces by Gabriel, who wants to teach them a lesson. Um,
Oh, and changing channels.
Changing channels, yeah.
Changing channels.
Changing
I'm sorry.
channels. Yeah, we saw them as doctors. We saw them as CSI. We saw them in the Japanese game show.
That
But in French Mistake, we saw them being actors.
right.
Mhm.
If there is a key, there must be
There must be a
a
law.
lock.
Changing channels. That CSI bit was one of my absolute favorite like little bits in the show because they nailed it so well that I will sometimes watch that episode just to see that clip because it's just brilliant.
Carol, do you have another one for us?
No, but I'm thinking of a whole bunch of alternate universe ones.
Okay. Well, you know, they also did prison guards at one point and SWAT officers, and they were even art dealers. So they're pretty interchangeable. Firemen, Homeland Security, coroners,
House buyers, home buyers, when they were
home buyers. Led to a whole lot of speculation.
And they also were prisoners. They went to jail. They went they snuck into the prisons.
Yep,
So
they were.
They were prisoners.
Even the orange jumpsuits couldn't make them look bad.
And that's saying something.
They had tailoring.
Yeah.
That particular costume is the answer for why you should always have your clothes tailored, even if you're buying cheap clothes, have them tailored.
So I think we've covered what they posed as, even in the one-offs on in the show. But fan fiction has opened up a lot of other possibilities. And ships aside, we've gotten to see them be all sorts of things, either post ghost hunting or the Winchesters in truly an alternate reality where they never were hunting monsters. So give us one of your favorites, Carol, and why it stands out to you.
Well, certainly the post-hunting ones, the curtain fix, as they're referred to, really opens up a huge area, because if they're not hunting anymore, what are they doing? And why did they stop hunting? Because sometimes they stopped hunting because one of them was injured, or that's actually a big one. So
Yeah.
within that, so what are they going to do? I mean, they have to live somehow. And that's where we see a lot of the more realistic scenarios. Dean, one of them, of course, the most popular, Dean is a mechanic. Dean knows how to work on cars, and so Dean is a mechanic, and that can range from your little down home town garage to maybe he's working on vintage cars or something like that because he has so much expertise. And then you find Sam is a teacher, or Sam works in a library, or something along those lines of academia or research, that kind of very book-oriented field. Because of course, those two things you don't even have to take a jump to have them be that realistic, that's what these guys would have gone into.
Okay, Melissa?
Canon. Of course, Gene is a repair, like he's one of my favorite fix. Dean's like a repairman. I don't really remember which shop, what kind of shop he was working with. I think it was more like a handyman fix it kind of shop. But Sam is the professor for like anthropological studies and that kind of stuff. And I really love the way that fits in. Sometimes some of my favorite fics, it's actually a little bit reversed where Sam is actually a mechanic, and that picks up on because I believe that Jared's the more auto mechanically inclined. He's the one that's more interested, I think, than Jensen. So that's always interesting to see when like it's Sam that's the mechanic and Dean is doing something else, whatever that something else is.
I've loved some of the small town fics that are usually are alternate, like they were never monster hunters, but sometimes they're curtain fic, where Sam owns a bookstore and Dean owns the bakery next door.
Yep.
And they bond over muffins and coffee. And it's just, and the story hinges on something that's going on in the town that isn't the end of the world, the apocalypse, or a monster. But it's just kind of fun watching the authors pull out the pieces of the characters' personalities that might work with that sort of a setting. Dean, with the way he likes to eat, bakery could work. And, Sam, books. The only hard part is ever getting him to let go of them.
Right.
So those are usually very cozy curtain fics or AUs where that's just going to be a nice, quiet read that everybody, it's just going to be a happy read. Karen?
Yeah, the whole bakery thing is a really nice one because, of course, we see Dean in canon. He likes cooking. Of course, he loves pie. He's apparently becomes a good cook. I mean, he's learned to do it when he was a kid to try to make something out of nothing. And now as an adult, he can really do stuff. And so to see him often in a bakery, or maybe he's in a grill, or a diner, but he's the cook there. And that doesn't take, again, a big stretch of our imagination because it's so close to canon and it meshes so well. So that's a really fun one. And then speaking of like them switching, I read this really great fic where, all right, Melissa, where Sam actually still was a hunter and the boys had been separated at some point as teenagers. And Sam had ended up being the one to stay with John and Dean had gone off. And I think they even thought each other was dead. And Dean is the one who became a professor, where he managed, of course, he fudged up his credentials and stuff, but he became a folklore professor and everything. And that was really fun because it makes sense, but because we so often see Sam in the academic role, it was really interesting to see Dean in that role for once, and how good he was with his students and coaching them and teaching and making it fun and stuff. So that's a really good, I don't remember the name, but it was a really, really good one. And then of course at some point they realize each other's alive and everything. But yeah, Dean was the folklore professor and Sam was
that's cool.
the hunter. Yeah. It's nice when they do something like that where, again, it's not a really far jump, but it's enough that really kind of makes you go, ooh, perspective change. And so that's always interesting.
Okay.
Like we know Dean can be a mechanic, but then what if Dean's something more esoteric than that?
Right. So this kind of ties in with Dean as with the working in a restaurant, cooking, whatever. It's an AU, but it's an AU that sets up that Sam and Dean have to leave John, and Dean's like barely 16 years old, and they flee. And Bobby helps them get started and whatever. But Dean has to raise Sam from like his, early teenage years all the way through. And eventually Dean goes on to open Winchester Pie Shop. And he does it all on his own. And it's really cool because you see the struggle that we see in our Dean of believing in himself and not thinking he's smart enough and not thinking he's good enough. And and Sam goes off, and Sam's pursuing his college and then post-college academia stuff. So Dean is truly doing this on his own, and it is so cleverly written because the author really pulled in all of those insecurities that Dean has, and you see him working through it, and you see him like standing on his own 2 feet and believing in himself, and then achieving this wild success. And at some point, Sam is in the pie shop, because it's not a bakery, it is truly a pie shop, and there is a Lucky Charms pie, and it's just, and if you're deep enough in the fandom, you understand why that Lucky Charms pie is just a love letter to the show. And even though it plays on that trope of Dean being in a kitchen, Dean being a cook or a baker or whatever, it's just so well done, because we see so many hints of our Dean, of his insecurities, and then there's this payoff that he becomes this huge success.
Okay. I read one once where it's a fairly small town, and there is this kind of forbidding house up on the hill. It's a mansion. It's fallen somewhat into disrepair. There was a terrible murder there a number of years ago, and a stranger comes to town, buys the mansion, but is a recluse. And Jared is the postman in this small town, and he just gets interested in wanting to know more about this recluse that moved into the house, because he can see nobody ever sees the guy come out for his mail. Nobody ever, all of his things, he must be very wealthy because everything just gets delivered. But Jared sees a figure behind the curtains. And so, being a very kind-natured soul, he tries to figure out how to make contact with this person. And as it turns out, Jensen is a best-selling author of mystery novels, very well off. And he bought the house that his parents were killed in. So they died. I think it was a murder-suicide. And so he bought the house. He's very wary about people, and he's also physically challenged because he's in a wheelchair. And so gradually, Jared wins his trust and his friendship, and Jensen kind of comes out of his shell, and it's a slow relationship build between the two of them, and a lot of it is learning to trust and open up, and Jensen letting go of a lot of his insecurities about his disability, and Jared being there to cheer him on. But it was a good story, and it was well written, and it was a very nice character study. Back to you, Carol.
So certainly, if we delve into the Jared Jensen side of fanfic, then you really get a lot of variety. I mean, maybe there's a really wonderful fic where Jensen is a concert pianist and Jared a food chef, and and they end up having to work together. They can be gardeners, and they can be oh gosh, like I'm overwhelmed with all the things they could be. They might be rock stars, or a rock star and a reporter, or a reporter and a famous model, or a designer and a model, or a photographer and a model. Really any kind of career you can think of can and is utilized when you start talking about real person fic, which is what it is when you're using Jensen and Jared as characters rather than Sam and Dean. But yeah, the pianist and the chef one is really good. Sometimes I've read one where they're competing chefs, like competing on a cooking show, and they're supposed to be, rivals and stuff. race car drivers, and actors, but maybe different kinds of actors, or like they're in blockbuster movies or superhero movies, or in little art house movies. And because even within a career, any given career, you can have these nuances of, are they a world-class dessert maker, baker, or are they, again, like in their own little pie shop? So the possibilities become really endless, and which makes for a lot of fun to write and a lot of fun to read.
Melissa?
Two other favorites that are both AU, but they're AU set in a supernatural world. One is where monsters and hunters are known. And so Dean becomes this, it's set after Stahl. And Dean becomes this hero because of everything that happens. And he's this really famous hunter, and he's out there, like, being the hunter and whatever and whatever. And Sam is off being, I think, a lawyer, probably. And then, like, he has to come and be Dean's bodyguard, and like all of the events. And it's an actually really interesting story, even though it's like, well, it's hunters, but it's not really, because the focus is more on people know now that there are creatures out there and all the struggles that the hunters have. The flip side of that is also there are monsters, the world is aware of it, and there are like men of letters and there are hunters. And the guys are raised by John and Mary because John's a man of letters and Mary has the legacy of being her father was a man of letters. So the boys are raised up to be men of letters, except that Dean's not interested in academia. He's more interested in creating gadgets to help hunters. And he's so focused on the action pieces of hunting. And, John's looking down on him because that's a hunter. That's just, they're just the hammer that we throw, blah, blah, blah. Like, John is so against hunting. And here is Dean, who's this brilliant, amazing hunter. So once Sam gets his Men of Letters credentials, Dean walks out. He goes to Uncle Bobby. Uncle Bobby's running a group of hunters that are connected with a local police force because the police are aware of like the bad things that happen. And it's hilarious because here is this group of ragtag hunters. There's Benny the Vampire, and there's Meg, and there's Cass, and there's Samandriel, and there's a werewolf. And it's like all of these supernatural creatures and some humans are fighting the bad supernatural creatures. And it is such a brilliantly written story. And it's eventually Sam is looking down on his brother and all the other hunters. And eventually Sam sees, no, wait a minute, they're onto something here. And Sam becomes a hunter, gives up being a man of letters. And it's just such an interesting sideways view of the world.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a whole subgenre of Sam as a forest ranger. And sometimes it's Sam, sometimes it's Jared. And rescuing Dean from freezing to death in the woods or being injured in the woods, and then finding out that he's on the run from something, or that there really are monsters, or that somebody tried to kill him, left him for dead, and now they're going to be after them. But clearly there are fan fiction writers who really embrace the Sam in flannel shirts view and put him in national parks and out in the middle of the woods as a survivalist and as the grumpy guy in the cabin who doesn't want anyone to bother him, but oh dear, there's a bleeding guy in his step and he has to do something about it. And of course, you see the relationship develop between the two, and then they team up to fight whatever it was. Usually Dean's the injured party and Sam is the forest ranger. But I've probably read at least 5 or 6 stories that are on that bent. And It's just fun seeing him being imagined as, Mr. Nature Guy. Carol, how about you?
So I had two things I thought of. One is there's also a lot of like mafia
Mm-hmm.
or, criminal big guys fix out there where they're both in the mafia. One of them's in the mafia and one gets, brought in for whatever reasons. And that's a whole big subsection of fiction. And the other is, and we touched on this now as we've been discussing, that in this version of the alternate worlds, there's kind of this one big dividing line. And that is, it's a world with magic and monsters, or it isn't.
Right.
There's no magic and monsters, no vampires, no ghosts or anything. So if it does have magic and monsters, it's very much like we're familiar with in canon. They might know about the monsters, they might not know about the monsters. That's kind of the only division within that. So sometimes you see where hunting is like this whole legalized thing, and there's like an FBI branch of hunters, or all kinds of fun acronyms and stuff. Or it might be like it really is in Supernatural, where it's all kind of in the dark under the covers. People don't really know about it. But then you have the non-magic AUs. So it's contemporary. It's Sam and Dean in any of these, like food chef or whatever, that these various roles that we've been discussing, but there's no magic at all. And then the fun thing can be, does the writer completely ignore the canon elements of Supernatural, like Dean is grumpy, Dean likes coffee, things like that? Or do they bring them in? And I'm going to reference myself for a second. I wrote a fic where there's no magic, but Sam's in Stanford and Dean does open a bakery. And they do have problems with a character who thinks he's an angel named Zachariah, and he's focused on Sam, and he ends up kidnapping Sam. And so it was really fun for me as a writer to take these things from the canon world and use them in a AU that doesn't have magic or monsters. And so there are a lot of stories like that out there where people are still using those elements and paying homage to those characters and everything, but in a non-magic world, So that's a whole nother, there's so many of these like kind of subsets out there, because the possibilities are endless, and the writers are incredibly imaginative, which is our delight as readers.
Absolutely. Melissa?
So I have a question. Is grumpy coffee loving trope Dean, or is that Jensen? Because that's
really a lot of times that's really Jensen, but that's kind of what just leapt to mind.
No, but we see it a lot with that's how Dean is portrayed, and there's parts of me, especially having seen between so many panels and then being at the cons, it's like sometimes I wonder which came first, chicken or the egg. And like if it's a very, very early fic, you can think, okay, they're pulling that from the show Dean, whether it's Dean or Jensen in the fic. And then some of the later ones I kind of go, I wonder where that particular character trait came from, because a lot of the actors' own personality quirks eventually some of those got worked into the show to begin with. So it's sometimes I'm like chicken egg. There are some great stories where Jensen and or Jared are vampires or werewolves, and they own strip clubs or nightclubs. And to me, that's always a fascinating world, because it's not just taking our regular world, but working in how those supernatural creatures would run these kinds of businesses. Always interesting to me. And it's, I tend to not read where Sam, Dean, Jared, or Jensen are the bad guys, that's not really entertaining for me. So I love to see these, like, they run a strip club, but it's, you know, they take really good care of the performers, and, you know, they chase out the bad guys, and those are fun.
Which is sort of like a mashup of True Blood with Supernatural, only using Sam and Dean or Jared and Jensen instead of Eric.
I've never seen True Blood, and I've
Eric
never
is a
read it.
vampire. Oh, Eric is a vampire who runs a strip club.
I think I need to read that then.
They're good.
Yeah, I agree that I can't. There is a whole huge set of fic out there where either they're the criminals, they're the bad guys, up to and including maybe they're serial killers or stuff.
Yeah.
Not my thing.
That's definitely one of the things, that your thing is your thing and it's not my thing.
Yes.
Welcome to enjoy your thing, but I can't go there.
Right.
You know, for me, that's so far from how I envision their characters to begin with, that it's beyond my realm of believability. But
And that's not what I read it.
I might like something that somebody else is going to
Right.
be, you know, and again, that's the beauty of the diversity.
Well, and that's not what I read fan fiction for. I read fan fiction to feel good.
Yeah.
I want happy stories. I want happy endings. I unabashedly love tooth rotting fluff because the world is a scary, hard place, and I disassociate and run away by reading any kind of fiction.
Right.
One of the other subsets you were mentioning, you know, they're mafia, they're this, they're that. There's also the subset where one of them is a detective and they are chasing a criminal. And of course, that criminal is either Sam/Jared or Jensen/Dean, but they're not guilty. And so they're chasing a falsely accused person. And then when they finally catch up, there's the moral dilemma of, well, what do I do? I don't think this person is guilty. And then trying to prove their innocence or skip the country, or, you know, this is where you can plug in multiple endings. But that's also a fun one when they are either pitted against each other and ultimately on the same side solving a crime, or and they could be government agents, or, but often it's a detective or a small town cop who's chasing somebody who is on the lam, escaped prisoner, and then finds out there's actually more to it. Because they just fit, that again fits our already formed personas of them from the show. If it's Sam and Dean, and you know, most of the time when we see the Jared or Jensen stepping in, it's because it's a world without magic, but we are still casting them just like they, you know, just like Jared's in Walker and Jensen's in Countdown. They can be in other shows, but they keep playing the same type. And so the fan fiction that has the real people fiction, to me, it's just like casting them in another show where it's playing to their strength of a certain type of character. It's not that they couldn't play a wildly different character on TV, but you know, stick with what works. And what we've seen of the shows they've gravitated toward since Supernatural often remind me a lot of some of the fics out there of, you know, out of Jensen and Jared real people fiction. So as we wrap up here, is there anything you want to mention that we haven't already covered?
Well, we need to talk about really AUAUs, but I think that deserves its whole own panel. Because we've been finding already so much that to discover, even with a more realistic fiction base, you know, that it is, you know, a world, and it's a world we know how it operates, and it's a world we can plug these characters in and create scenarios for them. Even, and I mean, even if they have the magic and monsters, because that's included, because that's what we have in canon. Mm-hmm. So even that's still just an extension. Yeah, it's, once you start looking at anything you can go down a rabbit hole of so many different flavors. And then that's the beauty of Archive of Our Own. If you decide you've
Yes.
read a fic with Sheriff Dean, you can go search that, say, give me Sheriff Dean fics. And there they all are for your, reading enjoyment. Yeah, and then maybe reading Sheriff Dean will lead you to Cowboy Sam or Cowboy Jared and all these different things, and then you can just it's such a great playground both for writing and for reading.
Mm-hmm. Melissa?
You were talking about the guys often appear in these RPFs as similar characters. It's like it's not too far away. I got one that hits me very differently. Jensen is a professional fisherman, so he's not grumpy, and he gets up early in the morning, and he willingly, without hesitation, without being a grump, gets up, fishes. Jared's a drag queen. He's a drag performer. He's not a drag queen. He's a drag performer, and that's also kind of different than the roles that we normally see these guys. It's really well written, and it's really interesting to see it. Like, that's not how we see Jensen, and yet it still really sounds like the Jensen that we see either in cons or in interviews or in all these different shows. It's just that the author really decided to take the things that we most commonly associate with these guys, whether it's as real RPF or in the different roles they performed, and just erased all of that. And yet you still get the sense of the things that at the core make them them. Mm-hmm. So that was a really fun story to read.
One of the other things I'd mention is there are fics out there where they'll take a movie and recast it as Jared and Jensen being the main characters, just like if you took a movie and remade it after 20 years with new cast.
Or even Sam and Dean.
Or even Sam and Dean. And you know the story. You know most of how this is going to play out. But in the hands of a good author, there are surprises because the casting has changed. Either we're seeing Sam and Dean in the story dealing with the story elements as Sam and Dean would deal with them, not as the original characters, or we're seeing Jared and Jensen recast into this. And again, the story changes because they're not the original characters. And that can be a lot of fun if you're willing to let go of that original movie and reimagine it and enjoy it from a completely different perspective. Well, folks, once again, we have run through our time. So before we wrap, let us know where we can find you and any news. Carole?
As Carole Stokes, I'm on Facebook, especially in the TFWNC group that Gail runs and the Continual Facebook group, and on many, 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 many Continual panels on various topics, not just supernatural, but other topics as well. And as Ellis Colton, all of my social media links and information is at elliscolton.com. You can pick up everything there. And as of today, my new book, The Malevolent Sea, which is the sequel to The Case of Thistledown House, where two young men are exploring a haunted house. Well, now these two young men have a new foe to defeat, and it might have something to do with a lighthouse.
Ooh.
Available now on Amazon.
Melissa?
You can find me here on Continual, usually talking about Supernatural. And Carole, happy book birthday.
Absolutely. And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. If you spell those right, you'll find me on all of the social media out there. I do run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, as well as helping to run Continual with a wonderful, gifted group of people who keep us running. And other than that, I'm just out there having fun. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up on Continual, so we'll see you online.